Everyone, thanks for joining. Just want to say just one last time before we get started, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes just for everyone to kind of pile in and settle in, and then we'll kind of kick things off. Thanks so much for joining us this morning or evening or wherever you're at.
Can I just think of all of you as my friends?
Yes. That's required.
Yes, yeah. All the folks that are joining, you're all our friends.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Vic, I think that was a question.
Oh,
in Berlin.
Prince Sauerberg. Does that sound familiar?
Nice.
Have you folks ever been to Berlin?
Yeah.
Oh, I have no idea where Berghain is, to be honest. I lived here for 7.5 years and I have never gone to Berghain. I don't have enough black clothes for that.
That's how I feel about living in San Francisco.
Yeah.
There's no comparison to New York, so.
Like my outfit has not changed at all, office or at home.
Okay, Agnes, we'll go to Berghain together.
Let's see, we had a question come in of where the recording will be at the end as well.
Yeah, we'll be sharing that. So just to let everyone know that this is being recorded, and once we get started and after today, we'll be sharing that out pretty soon. So definitely stay tuned for the recording, but rest assured, you'll definitely get it. All right, should we get started? Cool, all right. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us again, wherever you're at and whatever time it might be for you. Definitely appreciate you being here. So I just want to say, kind of kick it off and say hi and just hope everyone's doing well. My name's Joey and I'm here with Anthony, another design advocate at Figma. And just to let everyone know, it's kind of a different role, but designer advocates at Figma, we work closely with our users to, share best practices, gather feedback if you have any, and please share that with us, and just kind of foster design creativity within our Figma community here. Like many of you, I've been stuck at home for the last couple of weeks just trying to figure out how to live and work and kind of exist in this new situation that we're all in. The last couple of weeks, my focus has really just been on how to work most effectively at home. But I feel like this week, especially, I'm kind of realizing I can only be so effective and productive, just given what's going on right now. And maybe you're feeling the same. So I know that we're all kind of faced with a really unique situation and we're all kind of navigating this together. And it's just awesome to see so many of you in chat today. And just thank you for joining us. We definitely hope to keep creating more of these spaces to really just talk about design and life right now. So really appreciate everyone being here. Today, though, we are focusing on design sprints and especially how to do those or how to do them remotely. Some of you and who have joined us may be doing them, may have been doing them for a while, and it may be completely new to others. So actually today we're going to be hear from two amazing speakers on how they and their teams manage these remote sprints and kind of how they came to be. And both of our speakers actually published files to the community to help make this kind of an easier transition for everyone. So we'll get into that as well. But yeah, I just want to welcome everyone to use the chat to say hi, ask questions. Again, this will be sent out after. We'll be sharing the recording and any kind of accompanying links or files. I'll be monitoring the chat kind of as we go. So if you have questions, I'll be sure to ask our speakers though, as we kind of continue the stream. And lastly, if you're sitting there and you have a topic in mind for a future live stream or things that you want to talk about or hear about, definitely suggest those. We are all ears and we want to make these as kind of positive and useful as we can for everyone. Our goal is to continue to do these around once a week, and we just want to talk about things that are interesting. So yeah, so with that, let's actually dive in. And just want to thank everyone again one last time for joining. Really, really appreciate it. Awesome. So I want to just start by introducing our speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Cheechee Lin currently. Just Cheechee, if you don't mind introducing yourself and saying hey to everyone. Would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me here, Joey and Anthony. Really love Figma, so it's really a blessing to be here. So I'm Cheechee. I'm a product designer at Dropbox. I've been there for about 2 years now. for the whole time I've been working on the desktop application. And just a little bit more about me to make me a little bit more human. I grew up in Taiwan and I moved here when I was around 10, or sorry, I moved there when I was 10 and I moved back when I was 18 to go to college. Yeah, and I have a dog, his name is Cheerio, and I absolutely love him to bits. So maybe he'll make a guest appearance later today.
If we're lucky. Cheechee, thanks so much for being here. We definitely appreciate it. It's really good to have you. And then next, I want to introduce Viktoriia. Viktoriia, do you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Vic, or Viktoriia. I'm slightly socially awkward, I think. Although people say that I'm not, as soon as they find out or like get along with me. Sorry, I hate introducing myself as well.
Don't worry at all.
I'm a self-taught designer. So originally I come from Ukraine. I'm a career changer. So I used to study finance and credit, and I used to look for. I looked for a job while being a student in order to support my living, and I ended up doing all kinds of things. Like I used to be a cashier at the gas station in the night shift, and a waiter, all sorts of things. But I ended up being a content editor in a tech company. And this is how I learned about Photoshop and how I jumped into design. And that was like 10 years or 12 years ago. And there was no idea of product design back then. There was just graphic design, which was a very different kind of environment from what we currently have. And in 2012, I moved to Berlin, and I worked for a number of startups. And about 2 years ago, I joined Microsoft, and ever since, I work on a tasks and lists app as a product designer here at Microsoft to do.
Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. I'm sure you are not alone with your journey of how you got into design there as well. And I think I know quite a few people who have had pretty circuitous routes as well. That's a great career path for that, for that exact reason. Great. Awesome. So we're going to jump into just set the stage a little bit for what we're going to be talking about today. And before we jump into files and take a look at stuff, I just wanted to get a few questions out there and get some answers both from Vic and Cheechee just around, oh, you guys might hear my cat meowing a little bit. So probably a good place for us to start would just be how each of you how do you define design sprints and maybe some of the areas of why you find them important for the design process. And Vic, we want to start with you?
Sure. Yeah. So I think design sprints is a kind of an informed way to generate a broad number of ideas. And it's also a very versatile way to move quickly throughout all of the different design stages. I find it useful and interesting just because it's also a way to align and kind of inspire and to get inspired. I think of it as a sort of blood circulation of your team. And if you do design sprints kind of regularly, you will just get inspired by all kinds of the breadth of different ideas that your team has. And you would also align with all the different ideas that your team has, and you will have a path forward. Sorry.
You find that when you're talking about design sprints, do you find that everyone's aligned with what that idea is?
No, not necessarily, but I think it's a way to align with like the breadth and the scope of different ideas that people have and kind of be on the same page. And in terms of thinking in how you want to go forward with your product. But there is a beauty to it, you don't necessarily have to be aligned on one sort of idea. I think having a number of ideas is incredibly inspirational.
Awesome. Cheechee, maybe if you got some stuff to add to that, how would you define design sprints?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as a really rapid ideation generation cycle where you can get a lot of different perspectives in one room, sort of align around the problem and the users you're solving for, get everyone on the same page, get everyone excited about the different potential directions the team could go in. And then at the end, you could potentially put it in front of users and really quickly validate whether you're going in the right direction. So personally, I found it a really great like tool and methodology sort of to just zoom through and get everyone on the same page and generate a lot of excitement for the team.
Got it, got it. Building on that, and Cheechee, how do you decide who's included within the design sprints?
Yeah, so it's actually a fairly meticulous process to decide like at every stage who to invite. But generally, I've found that it's been really beneficial to have a very core group who's focused on the user and the target problems. Usually that includes the PM, a bunch of different designers that I work with closely, and a couple of engineers, just in one room to define like what are we going after, and then broaden it out to a lot of different perspectives, even teams that I don't really work closely with, or CX people that don't like interact with me on a day-to-day basis, just to generate a very wide breadth of ideas. So at the idea generation portion, it's definitely a much bigger audience, and I've definitely had sprints where that portion is like 30 people, and we had to get creative with how to get everyone's ideas shown and heard.
That's a lot of people to get the designs.
Yeah.
How do you find that experience going when you're reaching out to people? How do you get them engaged and want to get them involved in the process?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to get people engaged actually, because people get really excited about ideas and being asked to share their opinions. And I think like overall at Dropbox, it's been very collaborative. So people are always like, yes, I would love to participate. Yeah, it hasn't been too difficult.
That's great. That's awesome. Vic, I don't know if you got anything you wanted to add around who you include in your design sprints.
Yeah, I think another thing is that I find really helpful is to try to maybe involve people who are passionate about your product, but not entirely from your design team. So people who experience real life problems that you can empathize with and you can learn from them during the sprint. So you can, for example, invite them for a lightning talk or an interview, or even like a breakout how might we session where you can just quickly sketch ideas together. And you know, there are many ways, of course, to validate your ideas in a more precise way, but that would be a way for you to actually really empathize with your users' problems.
Very cool. Well, I know that there's a lot of, you just went through a lot of great topics that I'm sure we'll get to dive in on a bit more too as well, around lightning talks and all those ideas. From your perspective, how have you found it trying to pull people in who might not normally participate in the design process?
I don't know, with Figma, it has been incredibly easy. I remember the times when we used to run sprints before Figma, and you know, just the idea that you have to fly in people from different offices. Like, for example, we are a distributed team, and we have been a distributed team for quite a while. And for us, it always meant that we have to travel, and it's also not just a kind of an environmentally friendly solution. So it's been a hassle, and now knowing that how easy anyone can enter Figma and kind of jumpstart Figma, even without having any knowledge of design tooling at all, it's really refreshing to see that. So I think the only thing that I try to keep in mind is that whenever you're planning a sprint like this, is it's a good idea to kind of give an overview of the tooling to all the people who don't use Figma or never have been in a sprint before.
Vic and Cheechee, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Next, we're going to get into, I want to let Cheechee share her screen and kind of share one of the files that she created, but it looks like we actually have a really quick question that I'd like to answer maybe before we do that, if that's okay. So this came from Mohammed, and he asked, how do you manage getting people to commit for the entire duration of the sprint? It looks like he's faced situations where people are coming in and leaving between, you know, which of course, like as we know, kind of breaks the flow. Do you have any advice there for just allowing people to kind of continuously participate?
I don't know whether you, Cheechee, do you want to take this over and I can add up on top of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually run like various modified sprints in the past. And what ended up happening was like people would come and go throughout different phases, but we would have some sort of share out at the end of each day and sort of catch everyone who wasn't directly participating up to what had happened during that day. And I had found that like, although like having the full day could be beneficial in some cases, oftentimes it's really difficult, especially if people have a lot of different priorities, to actually get them to commit to the full day. So we try to like only gather people together when it's the most important to sort of like move forward.
Yeah, I think it's we're always looking for some sort of like continuity, and I think having very regular updates is very beneficial for those people who jump in and jump out of the sprint. And I think this is fine. That kind of provides another level of circulation of ideas when that happens. I think one thing is that sometimes people like in a diverge phase, you would have all kinds of different stakeholders to join, right? You will have stakeholders from different disciplines, and they would, this is so to create kind of like a very broad range of ideas. And you want to invite people who don't even know design tooling and don't know prototyping and don't know testing. But as you converge, you might actually want to form those kind of smaller teams with design, with people who have design expertise. So to kind of move a little bit faster, but also providing everyone else enough feedback and providing enough updates for them to kind of be posted.
Those are amazing answers. And Mohammed, thank you for the question. And just to let everyone know, if you do have a question, feel free to type that in the Q&A. If we don't get to it right away, we will likely get to it to the end, or we're also going to share out a deck at the very end just with the questions. And then I'm going to invite Cheechee and Vic to come in and to respond to those. So rest assured, if we don't get to it on air today, we'll definitely get to it soon. But I want to invite Cheechee to share your screen if you don't mind, and kind of walk through your remote design sprints file, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. Okay, so I'll just quickly give an overview of how we use this sprint process. So basically, we took a modified version of Google's design sprint methodology. So I think it's gv.com/sprint. They have really amazing resources there. Check it out if you need it. And ultimately, like this was the process that we sort of took. So align, ideate, polish, test, and then we regrouped at the very end. And as you can see here, there's a lot of participants, and they were all brought in during like different parts of the sprint. And this is one example. I've run different sprints in the past that had a smaller subset of people. That all depends on like what your goals are and what you really want to accomplish after finishing the sprint. And this is just another like breakdown of how this all came together. We were pioneering a new thing at Dropbox where we wanted to understand if we could also include prototyping into our process. So we actually ran an engineering sprint in parallel right after we came up with a breadth of ideas and solutions. And we used these two work streams to sort of inform each other. So huge shout out to my PM and engineering partners for setting this up and making it happen. But we found that it was really great to have also dedicate resources to prototyping and validating while we were also doing the design portion. So that was a really cool thing to see in the past sprint that we did. And again, a lot of different participants, but I'll be talking most about group 1, which actually used the distributed sprints kit that I'll be showing today. So what was interesting about this group was that we actually had everyone in different cities at the time. So Andrew was in Jen was in Seattle, Ian was in Portland, and Carol and Jiwon were actually here in San Francisco with me. And we had run this in January, so it was before the craziness kind of hit. But we were very interested in how we could actually run a distributed ideation session and make it as smooth as possible. And Jen is like a huge advocate for distributed working. She's been in Seattle for a while, and we've been thinking about how to actually make these ties better or stronger and facilitate this like the smoothest session possible. So I got a lot of input from her and Andrew before we started, But ultimately, what we came up with was sort of this idea of a template. And this is actually a live screenshot. You can see the layout's not perfect here, but the idea was very simple. It was that we would basically have cards for every single participant in our sprint, and each participant would be given a number of cards. And what we would do here was we would ask them to draw out their idea or sketch out their idea, take a photo of it, drag it into the fill, and ta-da, you can now present your idea and sort of cluster it. So you can see this would be phase 2 of the project, and this was ultimately what it ended up looking like. So we went through this process. It was really cool to just see everyone start dropping in their ideas, and then people were like scrolling around and like peeking at what other people were doing. We set up times, so it was like, I think 10 to 15 minutes of ideation on a very like focused prompt, and we started grouping. So we went around the Zoom room and each person presented their ideas. At this point in time, it was still in like a clean line. And as people started talking, they started grouping together the things or clusters that started emerging. And it was really cool because this effect became a very like collaborative process where everyone was sort of just helping out with clustering and grouping. And this made the overall synthesis process also super, super easy because we no longer had to go through at the end as a facilitator and say, okay, this sketch looks like something that I saw in that other sketch. And it just made it super simple because everyone was involved in just like dragging around different pieces and identifying things. So that was super cool to see. And yeah, so this is a photo of our team in action. Obviously, this was done when we were still in our HQ and some of us were still able to be in the same room. But I think from this process, we really learned that it is possible to have a very effective ideation session, even if you're not all in the same exact physical location. And we tried this out, and the 2 other groups that I pointed out earlier actually took the old methodology, which was just pen and paper and putting it up on a whiteboard and identifying patterns. But we found that it was this group that actually managed to cluster ideas most effectively and have a very thorough synthesis by the end of our 1-hour ideation session. So yeah, and ultimately we took this and we prototyped a couple of concepts with users, and this was sort of what it looked like. And we also prototyped it with engineering. So yeah, it was overall like a very smooth process. A huge thanks to Figma. Yeah, but so just to walk you through how this file is set up. So there's a little bit of a README just to sort of explain how things work and how to get started. And we have a demo here, which sort of breaks it down into phase 1 and phase 2. I can actually demo how to use a single card. So basically, let's say I have a photo that I would like to share with everyone. What I would do is I would simply drag it into the fill and it immediately goes in. And at the end of this phase, when everyone's gathered their ideas, then you can start dragging it around and grouping it. Cool. So it was a very simple idea as to like how we could facilitate, but we found that having everyone in Figma, having everyone like follow each other and zoom in onto the same part of the screen was super, super helpful.
That is so awesome to see. And oh man, you can almost really just like feel the merging of the doing it physically in the room versus doing it within the file. We've got some really amazing questions that are coming in. I'm hoping maybe you can answer a few of these for us as well. Brett's asking, was this a meeting when you went into the file here? Had these groups already met separately before, or was this the first time that everyone was working together in the same space, or was this breakout groups coming together?
These were breakout groups. So a core group of us had met together at like a day before and sort of identified the target user and the problem that we wanted to focus on this And from that point on, we brought in the broader group, and we spent, I think, like 10 minutes in the beginning with a very short presentation that was like, okay, let's align around what we had discussed the previous day and brought in all of our other stakeholders in the process. And from that point on, then we broke out into smaller sessions to ideate. Yeah.
Got it. And were these sprints done with just the designers, or did you? How did you bring the non-designers into the discussion, into the group?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the cursors you see here are actually, I think Ian was an engineer, Jiwan was an engineer. This was actually their first time using Figma, like beyond just inspecting an element and sort of building UI. And what we had done the previous day was we just ensured everyone had the appropriate permissions and editing licenses. And we gave a really quick demo on, okay, this is how it's up. It took me like 5 minutes to just quickly like point out, okay, these are pages, this is where the work happens, and these are like the properties. And from that point on, they were like, okay, this is super easy. We also spent like 5 minutes at the beginning of the session just sort of going through the demo and explaining what was going to happen today. And people just picked it up like that.
Awesome, very cool. I guess from just like a small technical thing, like as far as getting the drawings themselves from paper into Figma, did you guys have any tricks for that, or any quick approaches?
I think we used a number of hacky ways. I think someone tweeted at me when I released this kit that there's actually a plugin for this, which you should absolutely use. But the way we did it was a lot of us just slacked it to ourselves, or we like dropped it into Messenger. Yeah, any way works. Our company disables AirDrop on Mac, which is why we had to use some hacky ways. But
Awesome. No,
yeah,
that's great.
use the plugin.
Cheechee, one quick question that I have is, did you do a lot of like user testing like before these or kind of during these? Like, was that a core part of the design sprint of just making sure that you always had the user voice involved?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we actually took the output of these sprints and we just turned it into slightly higher fidelity mocks, and we started testing them with users. So who you see here is actually my user researcher, Megan, and she's fantastic. And we brought in users and we started prototyping. And at this phase, where these are all engineers in this photo, we actually prototyped this and we started testing with internal users as well. And people were using a live prototype and giving us feedback through a Slack channel or giving us feedback through email. And that was also super beneficial.
And then I have to ask, just because we're kind of in this world of uncertainty right now, do you have ways that you're kind of thinking about these going forward, like ways to kind of adapt to that remote life that we're all kind of finding ourselves in? Like, are there things that you might change about the current process or that the team is kind of thinking about together?
Yeah, I'm no expert. I'm also figuring this out as well. But I think like communication is super important, especially when we can't just like tap each other on the shoulder and say, hey, what do you think about this? So like having ways to make it feel more connected. Our team does this thing, our cross-functional team does bi-weekly stand-ups, and we've sort of moved it over into a paper doc where we just write, okay, this is what we're doing this week. And then we still keep like one meeting on the calendar just to have some FaceTime with everyone. But we are definitely like trying to over communicate, and whether that be through like Slack or just like writing updates. I think that's like super beneficial for helping everyone feel like they're still connected, even when we can't see each other physically.
I love that a lot. Communication is so important right now. I totally agree. One other question that came in that I wanted to ask is like, what's about the average size of, or is there a sweet spot for like the number of people involved in a sprint? Like, have you found that, you know, maybe if there's too many, it doesn't quite work as well, or if there's too few, you know, you're not getting enough input? Have you all like experimented around with that?
I think like in ideation sessions, especially, it's better to keep each ideation, the number of participants in a breakout session smaller, just so that everyone has time to go through their ideas and not feel rushed, and even have time to discuss and build on top of each other's ideas. Yeah, I would say that like keeping it under 7 or 8 for a single ideation session is ideal, and keeping the core group like the people that are going to be working on this problem is also very crucial. But I do think that the breadth of perspectives is very important just to ensure a successful sprint. So definitely like figuring out ways to bring in more people when it's appropriate, and then narrowing it down into a core group when you're about to like start prototyping. That's super important as well.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I just have one more question if for Cheechee, and then Vic, I'd love to move on to you and allow you to share your experience too. Cheechee, do you have any like sources that you kind of rely on for sourcing that user feedback, especially like as we're kind of in this time again? Do you have any ways that you're kind of seeking out that feedback, or kind of capturing or collecting that feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very fortunate to be working with some really, really amazing user researchers. So Megan and Fatima, if you're on this call, and they do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to going deep and finding like very specific users to talk to who can come in for like an hour and just chat about very foundational things. But I've also found it super helpful to leverage more lightweight testing. Like we have this thing at Dropbox called Real World Wednesday. It's moved into a more distributed fashion now, but essentially the idea was that we would bring in a couple of users every other week on Wednesdays and sit with them for around 3 hours in the afternoon. And they would go through a number of teams with different concepts that they wanted to show. And they would sort of just like rotate through all of these different mini focus groups essentially, and just like give their feedback. And that was super helpful for us to just get like quick and easy feedback. Yeah, and user testing is amazing. Just like lightweight testing, we also have this other Slack channel that's more of internal facing feedback, where we color coded our feedback. So we asked them to say, red means, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. Yellow is, okay, I'm not entirely sure what this is. And green is like, I love this. And we asked them to like sort of just type out their thoughts, share their feelings, and we always respond. So it's just like a multitude of different ways to get as many inputs as possible to unblock us.
I love that so much. Thank you again for sharing that. And I do want to remind everyone that your file and any kind of accompanying slides that we can share will also be kind of given out at the end. So definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you again, Cheechee. That was great.
Thank you so much.
And we have a couple of questions that came in, which I'll try to save for the end just to make sure that we have time. But Vic, I would love to turn it over to you and allow you to share the templates that you made and to kind of talk through the process at Microsoft.
Sure. Thank you, Cheechee, for that presentation. That's amazing. And I'm so happy that you went through all of the steps that you folks have been doing. My presentation is slightly different, and I think this is how they're going to kind of complement each other. So let me just, I'm so new to Zoom. I don't know how to share my screen.
So down at the bottom, there should be a screen share button on the video.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Apologies for that. I'm a
No,
Teams
we're all learning
person.
in the new world.
I'm a Teams person. Okay, let's see. So yeah, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, our team hasn't been remote, but we were distributed. So we were kind of sprinkled across Japan, India, Europe, and the US. And we started looking into remote sprints in January this year, before we all actually have gone remote for some obvious reasons. So the way we worked before all of this remote work happened is that we were focusing on establishing a culture of remote inclusion, and it was really kind of essential to us. I think without it, running any kind of remote operations is incredibly hard. So you need to make sure that people who you are working with feel comfortable with you working remotely. So it's been kind of a cornerstone for us. And so how do we run sprints? If you're a little bit like me, you probably don't have any classical design education, so you might find design sprints a little bit overwhelming. The way I think of them is that they're a little bit like this cookbook. So you don't actually have to learn the entire cookbook by heart. You can just kind of like take a couple of recipes from a cookbook and see what kind of ingredients you have in the fridge, and then cook something delicious. So this is how I also do them. I'm using the kind of sprint recipes to adjust to your specific needs. There is a fantastic resource from Google that supports you with different kinds of recipes for different kinds of sprints. And then we also run them regularly. This is why sometimes we call them alignment sprints. I think it's just a very good way for you to align the entire sprint. And then setting the right expectations and defining specific deliverables is incredibly important. This goes for any sprint, but I think especially right now, you know, what is the expectation for work that we produce in these extraordinary times? I think, can we actually go into a sprint marathon wholeheartedly for like entire week, knowing that we have kids and pets and worries and groceries to take care of? And so I think before you start setting up a remote sprint right now, breaking it down into smaller digestible pieces, and also letting people know that this is the specific expectation, these are the deliverables that we want to deliver, is going to help them to kind of be in the set of mind that it's not going to be a week-long exhausting marathon. As I mentioned, before you start a sprint, you might want to onboard all of your non-design friends. There are plenty of friends out there, so anyone who never had experience with any design tooling or sprints, you might even want to just have an entire onboarding session specifically for them. So what we noticed in remote sprints is that we cut back on time spent on calls. People get tired much quicker. There is a very different dynamic, and we also extended the time for all of the exercises. They take much longer. So whatever ambitious goals you have, just keep that in mind. Then the hardest about running a remote sprint isn't crazy eights, as you might have thought, but actually reading the room. So like, you actually have no understanding who's engaged, who's not engaged, who's understanding the task, what is the vibe in the room. Remember how many ideas we used to kind of just juggle around with our gestures in the room and kind of build on top of each other. And I think it's very different right now. So like, ideally, in future, there should be some kind of a nudge and response mechanism for that. Like, I think maybe potentially a Figma feature where you can, you know, see who's engaged, who's happy, who's unhappy, maybe see even faces of people you work with on the canvas. So what about these crazy eights? As people have mentioned, there is a plugin to upload them. We also did all of these sketches by hand. And kind of try to bring them onto the board. I think it's important to bring them onto the board just because it's important to keep everything documented and to have everything in one file without losing context. You might want to use your products or any open source wireframe kit, but it of course kind of increases the level of complexity of using Figma. So if you're actually working with just designers, that might be an option, but if you're working with many other people, that would be much harder. We tried software called Whiteboard. I think it's not there yet, but I'm really hoping that the industry is actually changing with us. So luckily we're not in isolation in this very weird time. So we can see a lot of companies are actually catching up with that. The breakout sessions is another question that I have experienced a lot of times. So as far as I understand, Zoom has breakout rooms that might be helpful to look into. I have not used that myself. I'm a Teams person, as I mentioned. And there is another tool that someone just mentioned on Twitter that is called Sococo that will help you create a kind of virtual office plan. To kind of give it a little bit, you know, your working situation a little bit more tangible experience. And there are timers. So I don't know, every time I show this to people, they're like, oh, this is so nice. So you can actually time exercises in a shared way on your board, which is super fun. But that means that whoever is the facilitator has to keep that going all the time. So we're looking to improve that kind of loading thing here, because it might be annoying just to have it all the time. So whoever has ideas on how to improve that, that would be fantastic. And yeah, don't forget to celebrate your achievements. I think this is something that we have really enjoyed, transitioning from the actual workplace with physical stuff. You know, there are certain trade-offs when you work in a physical room opposed to kind of a remote place. But like working in Figma and bringing in all of that creativity and kind of like, there are so many creative outlets right now for us in this very stressful situation. So like having these sorts of like cursor high fives and hugs that you can give to people, and building trash dinosaurs. I have no idea if you folks know about trash dinosaurs. I can just like, did I have this open? I did have this open. I can't, can I remove this thing?
Take your time. This is really awesome to see, Vic.
Yeah.
And like I still can't get over how cool the different timers are. Like even from a pure like illustration perspective in Figma, let alone the fact that they're able to run with the plugin is pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like these are just the folks building a trash dinosaur.
Oh, you meant to share your other screen real quick.
Sorry, what did you say?
Oh, Vic, you might have to share your other screen. We can only see your Figma app right now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so okay.
Take your time.
Yeah, no, if you just go to stop share and then share again, and you can select the new screen.
Okay, I think I figured it out.
There you go.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Do you folks see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So like
awesome.
25 minutes using virtual trash and just building that. Like, how cool is that? Okay, we can switch back to my presentation. Yeah, so basically after we have done that exercise with our team in January, I started to think, you know, how can we build something that we can reuse and just provide as many different recipes for the team to use to adjust to our needs. And so I put together this deck. You're still seeing my screen, right? Okay,
we got you.
Just checking. And try to provide with like, I don't know, like I'm not a open source software maintainer, but I thought that having good documentation is incredibly important. So I tried to provide as much documentation as possible for anyone who might be interested in running sprints, including, you know, like all of the timers, including basically the time box thing that I designed, providing with useful links that can help people to kind of get their head around the design sprints. And I don't know what happened here. Okay, so and kind of providing all the resources in order to manage the sprint logistics, the sprint challenge, sprint deliverables, dropping your lightning talks right there in the file, because it's very useful to kind of avoid context switching between different files. Then, you know, like having timers here and having how might we not notes, and different boards with instructions about what how might we are, so people can actually navigate through this easily. And you can also just drag and drop more post-it notes in here to kind of expand this. And then just like my thoughts and my ideas on how to improve the remote kind of situation, because we started noticing some of the frictions that were created. you know, transitioning from regular sprints to remote sprints. And
Do you
then,
mind,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but do you mind sharing just a little bit more about that, or what those notes were, or maybe those early ideas of how to sort of transition?
Yeah, so like on every task board, you would see something like this, where I put an emoji, of course, to draw attention. So it says, you know, in that exercise, we noticed that the facilitator can already note down common threads and topics for the next exercise, just because it's harder to shuffle those post-it notes around the board. So you might want to already start kind of grouping them together in your head. So there should be a responsible person for doing this. So, and then that would basically help you kind of organize and affinity map all of your post-it notes. And just like tips and tricks, you know, before dragging and dropping HelpMyQuiz onto the board, create a copy of a board before above to keep it documented, just because you might want to just have it right there, because post-its get lost, they get deleted. So like keeping it documented is important.
That's amazing.
Then sorry.
We had a quick question. I wanted to just hop back real quick when you mentioned the lightning talks, and was hoping that maybe you could just speak to those briefly and just help us understand how those are valuable.
Yeah, so I think lightning talks are is a very effective way to bring in different kinds of experts from different disciplines and kind of provide them specific insights that are aligned with your sprint challenge and kind of the deliverables that you want to achieve. So it's basically just a way to kind of shed a light, and maybe this is why they're called lightning talks and inspiration, on different specific areas of opportunities and challenges. And just having it right there in a file is also really useful, because then you can add as many talks as you want, and whoever is presenting is right there, and you can note down your thoughts, and there is no context switching to kind of disrupt that.
Awesome, super helpful, thank you.
Yeah, so like there is plenty of things in here. For example, there is an experience mapping board. And I tried also, as you can see, there are some kind of green post-its here. They might not be super intuitive, but basically these are just some tips and tricks that I try to provide to people who might not necessarily know how to use Figma. So I think that's a really good practice to keep in mind, is that we don't all know how to navigate this space. And this is a very kind of, you know, contextual way of providing tips and tricks. Yeah, so there are flowcharts you can build. So all of these are kind of resizable, you know, so you can actually do it quite quickly if you get a hand of it. There is a day in life. And again, you know, this is just a starter kit. So you can add as many exercises as you want. And I think this is why I provided also folks with all kinds of resources. So on the kit page, you would have different kinds of slides. You would also have all of these different sorts of sticky notes and tasks and flowcharts and a timer, but also tasks board. So you can actually, you know, bring in all sorts of your tasks that you want to bring in onto this board. Yeah, there is a competitor audit file. So basically how we did it is that we just brought in a bunch of like screenshots and marketing material onto this, and it kind of kept it there. And there is a kind of competitor mapping as well. So it will help you kind of position your product along these lines. There are crazy eights, and this is where I'm also kind of notifying people that, you know, you might find it very hard to actually sketch something in Figma, or maybe you are a pen person and you can actually do it with a pen, which is amazing, and I would love to see that. But if you're not, and if it's easier for you to actually draw something with your hand and on pen and paper, then this is something that you should do, and just try uploading all of these screenshots to keep it documented. And there are just a couple of thoughts on prototyping and validating, just because I think Figma is a really great space for doing these sorts of things, with a couple of links to specific, getting started with prototyping and Figma resources. And again, some ideas for how you might test your designs. Yeah, and there's this high five area.
That is awesome.
This is great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I just want to remind everyone again that this is available in the, this file is available in community, and we'll definitely share a link to that out after so that everyone can duplicate it and try this plugin and the timers for yourself as well. It looks like we have about 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to leave a little bit of time for some of the questions that came in, if that's okay with both of you, Vic and Cheechee. Cool. All right. So one that came in was, this is something I was wondering too. Can you talk, or could either of you talk a little bit more about how you run sprints regularly? Like, so specifically, like, how do you kind of describe and create the agenda for your alignment sprints? It looks like this, the person who asked this question said that they had run a sprint with their team and they all really liked it, but they were just wondering how to make it more concise and also kind of improve the cadence of it. Do you have any tips there?
You want to go first?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go for it.
Yeah, I think this is a kind of a challenging thing. I think usually you would have a really good idea of why you're running a sprint, and then you would start kind of unfurling from there. The way we did it with a couple of our sprints is that we'll have a kind of a session right before the sprint where we get together in a room with different kinds of stakeholders from different disciplines, and we're trying to kind of walk around this problem and try to understand what are we trying to solve with the sprint, and then we are trying to kind of draft the very basic timeline for it, and the opportunities and challenges that we want to look into this. So there are a couple of exercises for this as well in the link with the recipes that I provided. So you might do how might we's as well. Yeah, again, like this is the cookbook that I don't know by heart. So this is like usually something that I would go into and try to nugget the specific piece of information I need.
I love the analogy of a cookbook. I agree 100%. Yeah, I think alignment of goals and desired outcomes at the very beginning will ultimately shape like what pieces of the cookbook you try to assemble together. And so maybe it doesn't have to be full day sprints for 5 days. Maybe it's like 1 hour sessions for a number of days, and maybe it's spread out over the course of a couple of weeks, depending on people's bandwidth and how much validation you're able to put in during that period of time. So it's a very flexible methodology, I would say, and it's all up to you and your cross-functional partners or whoever is whoever is leading the sprint with you to sort of define what it is that you want for the outcome.
I think that's a really good point that you just made as well, Cheechee. Just like, it's a very flexible thing. And like, if parts work and parts don't, like totally take that and run with it. I like that a lot. So another question that came in that's super relevant right now is this person was wondering if there's any part of the sprint that you've tried doing asynchronously. Of course, now with everyone in quarantine and having to be separated, this might be more important than ever. And I'm curious if there are parts that might work better for this and parts that may not work as well.
I personally haven't tried asynchronous sprints yet, but I could imagine that as long as there's some way of communicating, I've seen some really cool tools out there like Loom or just ways to like talk over your ideas and show where you're pointing. Then that could be a very effective way to sort of work across like different time zones or just make sure that everyone is having the same context. We have been using this methodology at Dropbox where it's literally just a sticky note. Like we designed a rectangle with a slight drop shadow and we color coded it. So each person, it has a different color. And then we just leave little sticky notes on each other's designs, especially if we have slightly mismatched schedules. Huge shout out to Justin Kwok for that idea. But yeah, that's like one way we've been doing like crits or just like leaving feedback on ideas asynchronously.
That's awesome.
Just
Viktoriia, anything to add? Sorry.
Yeah, just to kind of add up on this, what came out from our like remote session is that of course you might want to like spend some time setting it up, and this is something that you can do asynchronously. You might want to like summarize exercises. So for example, clustering how might we's is also a possibility to do that as a facilitator, and then kind of run it through in the beginning of the session with the rest of the team. Prototyping, you know, something that any of the designers can take away these little ideas and try to start prototyping the specific flows by themselves. I think I would probably never skip the kind of understand stage, because this is where the magic happens. So this is something that the team should not do asynchronously.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine now more than ever, people's time on the teams is probably one of the most valuable things, and how we use that effectively. So building on that, and Vic, maybe we'll go back to you for this. How are you deciding the scope of those sprints? We had a few questions come in around things like, how are you setting the time frame or the milestones, and is it consistent? Does it change?
Yeah, so if you're a little bit like me, which I'm as an introvert, and it's incredibly exhausting for me to have all sorts of like human interactions. I always thought of sprints as a really exhausting exercise. So Figma changed a lot of this. And sorry, can you repeat the question again so I can kind of like recalibrate?
Just wondering how you're setting the scope for your design sprints. Has that changed in any way recently? You know?
I got carried away a little bit.
I asked a few questions at once, so there you go.
Yeah, so the way I started looking at this is that actually it's very useful to just take it one step at a time. And I think that will help you to kind of recalibrate for further steps and try to understand your schedule a little bit better. So we would just break it down into smaller workshops. We don't even call them sprints. We will just try to kind of get one piece of information that we need and kind of try to go from there and plan something further. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Cheechee, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, we definitely like recalibrate. In the past sprint example I showed, we recalibrated pretty much at the end of the day with the very core group, like three, 4 people. And we were like, all right, should we adjust the timeline? Are we still in line with our goals? So yeah, like I think having a general idea of the scope at the beginning is a good idea, but as you go on, it'll probably need to be flexible, especially as we're moving into this distributed way of working.
Continually refine as we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're approaching the top of the hour. I just want to thank everyone for joining. I know that it's been kind of a rough time for a lot of people right now, and it's, for me at least, it's so great to see so many people from the community together, and to see this chat just kind of coming in, all these chats coming in really, really quickly. And I also just want to reiterate that we will be sharing this. And I know there were a lot of Q&As that didn't have time to get answered. We're going to be putting together just a general deck with those Q&As in there, and I'm going to share that with Vic and Cheechee if they are able to add their answers, and then we'll be able to share that out after. And all the files that they also showed today will be shared as well. So I just want to say thank you again. Again, it's so good to see all of you. We're doing these really often, so check out figma.com/events to see more of them and which ones you can actually tune into. And yeah, I just want to remind everyone to stay safe, stay in, and it's just really good to see everyone, and we all really appreciate you joining. And finally, thank you to Vic and Cheechee for hanging out with us for the hour. It's so good to have you both here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
And then lastly, if I can say, if there's any topics at all that anyone is curious or wants to hear more about, send us a tweet, let us know. We're definitely, we're trying to be as open as possible. And again, want these to be as fun and useful as we can for everyone. So with that, thank you everyone, stay safe and appreciate you spending your time with us.